I made a train table for my kids. It has built-in tracks and storage. This video is sponsored by MLCS Woodworking. They have a lot of routers and router bits that I used to build this table. One of the coolest things that they have is this jig for a fast joint system that I use for the draws. I mean, how cool is that? That's a heart joint, and it was really easy to do using a jig for the router table. Let's get started. I started this project off by milling up all of my own lumber. This is not a necessary step, I just like to make my life difficult sometimes. I have a planer, so I might as well use it. Don't get fooled, this step actually takes a really long time to do. I don't have a jointer, but the MLCS router table with X1 fence acts as a jointer if you offset the outfeed fence a little bit. You can offset it by a 32nd or a 16th, and it ends up coming off super square. After one edge was square from the router table, I took all the boards over to the table saw and squared up the other edge. Again, these steps are not necessary, and the plans that I have on my website are based off of dimensional lumber that you could buy at Home Depot. If you were following those plans, start now. In order to make the glue up go easier, I decided to use dowels to join the boards. You could also use a biscuit joiner, I just don't have one. To determine the correct drilling depth, I marked a halfway point on the dowel and put it in the jig, and then just put some tape to use as a stop. This jig automatically finds the center of the board, and you just need to line it up to the lines that you had made earlier and drill away. It definitely takes some time to drill all of these holes, but I think that it definitely pays off to put in some effort before the glue up. That way your glue up stays flat and there's less sanding and leveling out to do. Now, the deep breath before the glue up. It actually wasn't really so necessary this time because I spent that time putting the holes for the dowels in. The glue up went super smooth. I glued up 2 of these panels. This is for the main box of the train table. This is for the top and the bottom part. And then I glued up a 3rd panel, which was smaller, which I'm going to cut into 3 different pieces to make up the sides and the divider of the main box. After the glue dried, I cleaned up the edges on the table saw, and then I cut it into 3 equal pieces. So now I had a total of 5 pieces for the main box of the train table. Now that all the panels for the box were prepared, I was able to move on to the base. I decided to mill up my own 2x2s from this huge piece of poplar. You do not need to do this. The plans that I wrote up are based off of 2x2s that you could pick up at Home Depot. After cutting to rough length on the miter saw, I cleaned them up at the planer and then took them to the table saw to clean them up a little bit more. And then I ripped them into roughly 2-inch pieces to make my own 2x2s, which are actually 1.5s by 1.5s. And then I got to that final dimension by sending them through the planer. Now that all of my parts are ready, it was time to move on to the tracks. I created this template that you could print out from my website, but if you print it out, make sure you set all the margins to 0 so that it's the correct size. Okay, so first of all, I think there's going to be a few people out there who are going to be upset that I'm routing tracks directly into this white oak top. But I am sick of looking at big, clunky, ugly plastic furniture in my kids' playroom, and I just want something nice in the playroom. So if you want to make this and not use white oak, you could definitely do it out of MDF and paint it. You could do it out of plywood, pine, do it whatever you want to do. And if you don't want to have something so permanent, you can just route out a top layer of something that's like a 1/4 inch thick, maybe like MDF or plywood, and have that stored away and put on top of a table if you want. Or what my original plan was going to be was to route out the top and leave the underside empty and have it so that you can flip it up and down. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to fix it into place into the table. So lots of options here, lots of things that you can do. And here's another option. My original plan was actually to use this router to route out all these tracks. And then I just did a test piece. I was smart. I did a test piece before I went to do it. And I wasn't so happy with the results only because of my routing skills. I am not so good at freehand routing. So if you're more comfortable at freehand routing, you could definitely give this a shot. I'm going to take this over to my CNC. Sorry, all the CNC haters. But there is an option. You could download this template on my website, print it out. You could do it yourself, or you could download the files for the CNC and cut it on a CNC. Always options. All right, let's go. There is a ton of work that goes into creating files for the CNC, particularly these circles, and getting them to the correct radius where the train would actually go around was really hard to do and a lot of trial and error. But something that I had overlooked was that middle oval. I did not realize that the radius wasn't good enough for the train. It was a little bit too tight. So I ended up having to take a stab at the freehand routing using the Rocky 30 trim router with Plunge base. And you know what, guys? It really wasn't so bad. So maybe I could have done this whole thing by hand. I just kept taking the train, taking it through the tracks, and then using the Plunge router to route out some more space for the train to move freely. This took a little bit of time, but it ended up being good, and I fixed the file that you could download on my website, so we're all good there. Store-bought tracks have a slight bevel to them, so I tried to mimic that look with sanding. I was trying to figure out the best way to do it, and what ended up working for me was using a rotary tool with the sanding disc attachment, not this drum sander attachment. This actually took a really, really long time, and then followed up by hand sanding. My shoulders were killing me. Moving on, I trimmed it up with my circular saw, and I saved those cutoffs to create splines for the joinery for the box. This is something that I've never done before, and I just really wanted to try something new and challenge myself. So there's definitely other ways to join this box, easier ways to join this box, but I just always like to try new things and challenge myself. To create the slots to house the splines, I used a slot cutting bit from MLCS, and I only did this for the 3 smaller pieces. We'll get to the larger panels in a bit. I didn't want the slot to be visible, so I made a plunge cut on the router table. To do this, I made some marks in the fence for where to start and stop the cut. I slowly plunged the wood into the bit so the front of the board was at the pencil line on the left, and stopped and pulled the board away when the back of the wood reached the pencil line on the right. Then I used the Rocky 30 trim router with plunge base to plunge the slots in the top and bottom. This was really time consuming in the setup of the cut because I had to make sure it was absolutely square and in the exact locations on both pieces. But then once I got it set up, using this plunge router made it super simple to do. Now for the splines. I had to round over one corner to make sure it would fit where the slot cutting bit went in, and notice the grain direction. It's running up and down, so it's strong and it won't snap in half, but it's also running through the width of the whole table so that it will move together with the seasons. At least I hope. I've never done this before. I hope that these splines will hold up. Someone tell me what you think down below. Clamping up that middle was a little bit difficult to figure out how to put pressure in the middle. I ended up putting some cauls in, and when gluing this up, I only glued in the bottom part first. I didn't glue the top part yet because I wouldn't be able to put my drill in to put in the draw slides. And these right angle clamps were really helpful in this part of the glue up to make sure that the draw slide will run smoothly. While that was drying, I got to working on the draws. I took some plywood and ripped the pieces to 3 inches thick, and then I cut them to length using my crosscut sled. I love using the crosscut sled with the stop lock for repeatable cuts. It's really just been so great with my workflow. Before doing any joinery on the draws, I decided to put a groove that was going to house the 1/4 inch piece of plywood I was using as the bottom of the draw. First I took a scrap and I made one cut, and then I cut all of my pieces, and then I moved my fence and used that scrap to make sure that the 1/4 inch plywood was going to fit. And now the fence was perfectly set up and I could run the rest of my pieces through, except I made this groove a little bit too low. You'll see the mistake I made here. To join the front of the box, I used the fast joint system from MLCS. The system is so cool. Everything you need to make the joint comes with the system. The router bit, the guide bushing, the clamps. There are a ton of templates to choose from, and I chose this heart joint to keep it playful for my kids. You have to set up the height of the router bit to just above the height of the pieces you're using as the sides, and that's the last time you need to adjust the height of the bit. The kit also comes with this setup block that helps you position the material in the right place. Then you just have to slowly hog away the material until the guide bushing is running along the template. The only thing to note is that you must clear all of the sawdust out of the way so there's nothing blocking the guide bushing from the template. Then for the front pieces, you just need to flip it over to the opposite sides. It even comes with these spring clamps. And then hog away at that material. So you'll see the mistake that I made was the groove that I made for the bottom is just a little bit too low and it was showing through my joint. So next time, that's just something to be aware of. This system is just really easy to use and so unique. I'm really happy with how it turned out. Moving on to the draw back. I figured nobody was going to really see this, so I didn't need to make a cool joint. So I just made a dado with taking multiple passes on the table saw, and then I cleaned it up using my router plane since I don't have a flat bottom blade. Now it's nice and smooth. The last cut for the draws was for the draw backs, and this is cut to the width that's like just above the groove so that I could slide the bottom in. Gluing up the joint from the fast joint system was so quick and simple and easy to do, just a few taps with my mallet and it went right into place. The best thing about this is that it was dead on square right off the bat. So I just continued gluing up the rest of the draw, and then I put in the draw back that was making sure that there was enough room to slide the plywood in through the bottom. I clamped it up. While that was drying, I took all the measurements for the 1/4 inch piece that I was using as the bottom. I cut that to size, and then when it was dry, I glued it into place, tapping it in with my mallet, and then I used my brad nailer to tack it into place in the back. Onto the draw slides. This was my first time putting in draw slides like this, and it was surprisingly easy. I just used some spacers to make sure that they were in the exact location on all sides of the box. And then I used other spacers and put the draw in place. And then I used my combination square to make sure that the track was the correct distance from the front of the draw, and then screwed that into place. And then I had 2 functioning draws, and it was really satisfying to see them go in and out and work like that. Like, happy dance satisfying. Now that the draws were in place, I was able to assemble the rest of the box. I glued the splines into the top of the box, and then I lowered it onto the rest of it, and it was so satisfying to see it all fit together, and all my hard work and measuring paid off. I clamped it all up and got to working on the base. I cut all the poplar 2x2s to the correct size, but before doing any assembly, I took the apron pieces over to the drill press, and I took a bit that was slightly larger than the screws I was using and drilled all the way through the apron pieces. Then I used a Forstner bit that was slightly larger than the washer head of the screw and set the depth stop so it wouldn't go all the way through and there would be a perfect amount of screw length sticking out the other side. The wiggle room in these holes will hopefully allow for the top of the box to move freely with seasonal changes. I decided to use the dowel jig again to join the base, and it's really simple and easy to use. You just have to make some measurements beforehand. The legs, you have to make holes in the sides, and the stretchers and aprons, you have to make holes in the ends. So you just have to make your marks and drill away. I love how easy this jig is to use, and when used correctly, all the pieces line up really well together. The only difficult part about using this jig was when I was drilling into the end grain, it was hard for me to put pressure on the board. So I figured out the best way to do this was to use my leg clamps. After drilling all the holes, it was time for assembly, and it went super smooth. I'm so happy with how well this glue up went. I'm using 3/8 inch dowels here, and I think the general rule with joinery is to work with thirds, so I think 3/8 might be too small if you follow that rule, but I think that it's going to hold up pretty well. Maybe I should have used 1/2 inch, maybe I should have used 2 smaller dowels. Either way, I think it's strong and I think it's going to be fine. So I glued up the 2 sides first, and then once I had the 2 sides glued up, I was able to attach the longer aprons and longer stretchers and make the table whole. It was really satisfying to me when everything just lined up perfectly and went right into place. I clamped it all up and set it off to dry. I decided to paint it black because I originally had a vision that this table would have a metal base, but I don't know how to work with metal. So painting it black was my only option, and I think it looks pretty cool. While that dried, I worked on the draws a little bit more. I used a roundover bit in the trim router to smooth all the edges and then sanded them smooth also. And now for the draw fronts. I took a piece of oak and cut it to size, and I didn't want any hardware on it, so I took it to the router table and I used a 30-degree chamfer bit and made a slight bevel on one of the edges. This makes a hidden pull, which looks super cool, and it's a really cool detail. And now for the continuous grain, I temporarily attached the board using double-sided tape. I added some clamps for more strength, and then I pre-drilled through the front of the draws. I also put some screws in. I don't know where that footage went. And then I marked a center line so that I would know where to cut the board in half. I took the screws out, and now you can see that I have the center line and I have the holes in the board so that I know where to align them again. I cut the board in half on my crosscut sled, and then I put the screw into the draw just a little bit so it was poking out a little bit. That way I was able to line up the holes that I made before, and it was really easy and it was perfectly lined up. I screwed the draws into place, and it was so satisfying, like so happy that it worked so well. See, the screw poked out just a little bit. I put the board on, screw into place, magic. On to the finish. My friends at Rubio Monocoat were nice enough to send me some of their oil. I love using this stuff. I've used it in the past, and it's just so easy to apply. As the name Monocoat implies, you have one coat and that's it. I just spread it around with a super fancy Dave & Buster's card, and then after 10 minutes, I could rub it away with a towel. It was just a little bit more time consuming with the tracks to buff it away inside those tracks. This stuff goes a really long way. That little bottle was way too much for this whole table, and it also smells really good. I love this stuff. And after that dried, which was super quick, it was time to assemble the top to the base. Since I pre-drilled those holes in the apron beforehand, this part was super simple. I just pre-drilled a little bit into the oak, and then I locked it all down with screws. I had a little bit of an oversight. The stretchers on the sides were a little bit too low for me to fit my drill, so I used a right angle attachment, and it worked out fine. Then I just had to flip it over, and it's done. I was so happy to get this into place and get those drawers in. Well, there you have it. It's finished. I'm really super happy with how it came out. I really hope that my kids enjoy it and play with it for years to come. I'm so happy with how clean and modern it looks. I am really happy that I think that this is going to be a start of a revamp of my playroom where I just throw all the plastic junk out and build some really nice stuff. So I'm taking my playroom back. So some notes about the build. These splines that I had used, I think it was more of a hassle than anything else. There's definitely easier ways to join this, a butt joint. I wanted to try something new and I hope it holds up. And I'm happy that I tried something new. I'm happy that I experimented, but it took longer than I had wanted it to. The tracks, I'm happy that I had a CNC that I was able to do it, but as I got a little bit more comfortable freehand routing, I think it's totally possible to freehand route something like this. You could even make a circle jig where to create the circles in some sort of way, and it would be easier to do it like that. These drawer slides, it's the first time that I use drawer slides like this, and I'm shocked with how easy it actually was. I was really intimidated to start it, and it really was just so easy to do. I'm very happy about that. Also, the continuous grain in the front. I mean, I also thought that would be more difficult, but it was so easy to do. The hidden pull over here also, it's just using a router bit on the router table, and it just makes such a big difference in the table. I'm so happy with how the heart joints turned out. Even though I made a little bit of a mistake, I made the groove to house the bottom a little bit too low, so I had to fill it in with some filler, something just to note for next time, and I'm just really happy right now. I'm really loving how this looks. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. And now for some glamour shots. I really hope you guys enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed building it. I really had a fun time with this one, so I hope that you guys did too. And thank you again to MLCS for sponsoring this video. Now let's see this thing in action.
Thank you, Morgan. Thank you.
Where do you think the trains are?
Over here.
No.
Here. Put some tracks on there. He's going back.
Oh my goodness.
He's going back to his shed. Hey, just go this way. He's going this way. Hey, he's going back around. City. Mommy.
What?
So fun.
So fun?
Yeah. Well, the big ones could work. The big ones could work. So crazy. It's like, look at them. That's going in circles. I love it. It's so awesome. So open the drawer.